race and branding in 2020? Are we making progress or are we making a step backwards? Now, the person who is going to be telling us many of the things that we should reflect on is none other than Darold Cuba. Darold is a Center for Public Leadership Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School, but that's not all. He's also Ivy League's first Wikipedia Fellow and also the inaugural History Fellow at the Washington National Cathedral. Another thing that is very interesting, aside from this academic side of him, is that he founded Hacking Racism at the Columbia Business School's Innovation and Entrepreneurship Incubator, which is also known as IE at Columbia, to help people dismantle systemic white supremacy and institutional racism in their everyday lives. That in turn birthed the Mapping Freedom Project, which interactively documents and digitally maps all of the freedom colonies on the planet. Darold, if you're so kind to just help us understand, how did the US get to this level? What are some of the historical realities that we need to understand looking at it from the outside looking in?
Well, thank you for inviting me, Gilbert, and welcome to everyone who's here, wherever you're from. That was an amazing intro. The U.S. was founded, on the basis of race, right? And if anyone has read or heard of Columbia University's first Black woman to be tenured, wrote the book Racecraft, where she explained how there is no such thing as race, right? Scientifically, genetically, biologically. It is purely a social, economic, political construct that, as Toni Morrison says, was created to do something to people. A bunch of kings and a bunch of nobles and a bunch of businessmen got together, and literally, like, these colonies were their startups, right? And so when the Virginia colony was established, and tobacco was found to be profitable, they had to have people to work that tobacco. And again, these are nobles, these are royals, they're not gonna do it. They had devised a system in Europe where majority of people were created as peasants, as feudal serfs. So they just replicated that same system, and to convince those peasants to leave their European homelands and come work in the colonies, they literally just extended or replicated the same sort of social, economic, political system, and coming up with race as sort of the lowest, right? So the peasant class were no longer the lowest. The peasant class could now be racialized.
And today, you think that that mentality has survived? It survived the civil rights movement. It survived the national wars. So how could such a mentality survive? And perhaps, as you answer that, you can tell us something about the civil rights movement itself and what it has achieved, so that we can try to see what the gaps are.
Well, yes. Not only did it not survive, it actually strengthened over the years, right? Because again, race isn't real. It has, biologically, scientifically, genetically, it has to have a cultural foundation of systems and institutions to keep it going. Throughout each century, throughout each event, people had to now prove that they were white when they came here, right? There are, even cases where Iranians and Arabs fought in court to have the designation of white as a race, because they knew that it was better than being branded as not white. So again, with that history, every subsequent event, on down to the George Floyd event, where that officer was still performing the same sort of cultural value, right? He was proving that he was white and George Floyd was not white. But that sort of thing has been happening since the establishment of this country and settler colonialism in general. So this is
but
nothing
tell us
new.
about the media side, and maybe there are two aspects to it, really. So you have, the CNNs, the Fox News, all these guys that we have access to over here, these big media platforms. And whenever we switch on these platforms, we see riots, we see commentary, we see analysis, we see all these things. And we don't necessarily have a nuanced view other than what we're seeing. So what do you make of how the news media portrays this particular challenge?
Well, as an alum of the news media and a recovering journalist and producer my own self, we have to turn a lens on our industry, right? And I think it's been reported so many times now that there's no one sort of real source from it. But even, the news media is still one of the whitest industries, right? Meaning the people who are literally creating what they call the first draft of history identify or need to be white, right? These are people who have come here from Ellis Island, they're Ellis Island immigrants. They usually aren't run by, so say, like the first families of Virginia, right? And not to get into the noblesse oblige, but you find that the more patrician the family, the older the family, the more they've learned from their mistakes, right? Not to absolve these people from what they're doing, but you have to understand the unspoken class rules in the US.
Right now, there is a sort of a movement that is calling for some form of affirmative action and other measures that will perhaps tilt the scales, change the situation. And I want to come to the Black Lives Matter movement. I think everyone on this call has probably heard about that movement. Can you just tell us, briefly what that movement is all about, what it seeks to achieve? Does it seek to achieve affirmative action? What are some of the main asks that movement has at this point in time?
Well, Black Lives Matter itself is, like you said, a movement. And it simply, it started simply, I don't speak for them, but from what I've read and heard, just declaring Black Lives Matter in a country where Black lives have never mattered. If you were branded Black, you were not considered, equal to people who were branded white or not Black. And again, I think it was after the Trayvon Martin acquittal case where his white shooter, George Zimmerman, was acquitted, that, a woman who had, two friends, I think it was Alicia Garza, or maybe it was Patrice Cullors, Opal Tometi. Someone literally wrote like sort of their reaction to that on Facebook and just said at the end of it, Black Lives Matter. And because it was such a pivotal moment in our country, I think that just caught on. Before you know it, people were using that hashtag to talk about the different things they were doing to take action, right? Again, Black people and people of color and allies or accomplices who are branded white have been literally, as Nicole Hannah-Jones from the New York Times Magazine said in the CC19 Project, working to make this country equal since they got here.
Let me just summarize some of the things that you've been saying, which for me are fundamental. Number one, the whole capitalistic system, as we understand it, has been tainted by this problem called racism, which has no foundation in biology, in genetics, in anything. It's just a socio-cultural engineering process whose objective was to create a hierarchy that was going to benefit certain elites. And now we are at a point where that system can no longer stay in the state it was created in, simply because the challenges that the world is facing require all of us and require dismantling these systems and these hierarchies. Clearly, brands and companies are at the very heart of this problem because they are part of the capitalistic economic paradigm. We all love companies. They inspire us. They make us feel great. They make us feel proud. We all know some of the greats, Coca-Cola, Nike, and so forth. Now, it turns out that quite a number of them have come out boldly to say that they are against racism. We see Nike, for example, posting adverts with Kaepernick, who has been very vocal against racism. He even knelt during the playing of the national anthem, which is technically illegal in the NFL, and it caused a whole uproar, but Nike supported him publicly. We have other companies in the US that are also speaking out. So my question is what these companies are doing the right thing for them to do? 2, is it too little too late? 3, is there room for them to still have impact and for them to still play their role? And maybe in passing, you can let us know whether they do have a role to play in this issue of race. We ran a poll on our social media, and 83% of the respondents were saying that yes, brands and companies have a role to play when it comes to race. 11% said no, and 6% said maybe. Maybe as you answer the question, you can let us know whether you have an opinion about that specific question, which is, do brands have a role to play when it comes to race? Over to you.
Well, I'll start off saying, of course, they have a role to play. And because most of the brands, if not all of the brands today, were founded in a culture of racism, then it is up to them to help dismantle and eliminate systemic racism, institutionalized white supremacy. And like you said, many have started at least to publicly do that. Now, if it's too little too late, economics will tell, right? I personally think that any company that hasn't been in the forefront, before all this stuff became public, they have a lot of catching up to do, right? Because you have the universities. Harvard itself has started a Harvard and Slavery Project, which details Harvard's history with slavery. Columbia has a program. UVA, many of the universities have already started doing this. And these aren't corporations, right? These are just academic worlds that, don't make as much money as, say, many multinational corporations who could have afforded to do this long time ago.
Do you think that they're caught between a rock and a hard place? Because, as you said, they might be thinking, well, most of our target demographics are not so interested in this issue. And then on the other hand, obviously the world is watching. And we all know that we like buying good brands. We like, going to good countries. We like good CEOs from a perspective of morality, ethics, racism.
Right.
But on the other hand, there is a huge segment of their markets that are consisting of these, upwardly mobile white clients. So, how do they come out of it? It's a tough one. Do they just jump over a cliff and say, you know what, we're going to do the right thing? Or do they try to find a middle ground? Is there a middle ground even?
I get flack for saying this. I have a lot of friends in Germany, and they tell me, you're at the place where Germany was now, right? So it is a question of morality. Those companies that do the right thing and fix their racism or end their racism and tell the truth about what they have been doing and work to fix it will find themselves surviving. And so I think, not to be so alarming, but I think we really are at a point where companies are going to either put up or they're going to get shut down.
And do you think they will answer the call and make the necessary painful changes? Because clearly what you're saying is that they are going to be painful. It's just that they have to make the decision. From what you're saying, do you believe they are going to take those measures? Because that answers the question in our theme, right? is this a step forward, or are we making a step back? Because if there is no step forward, if there are no necessary changes, then I'm actually thinking it's going to get worse in the US specifically. So I would hope that it's not going to go that direction. But just, from the top of your mind, do you think they can make these tough decisions? The big ones certainly seem like they are making the tough decisions, but how about most of the companies that you see, not just, in the corporate sector, but you also have the news media that we've talked about, you have university, you have the school system. Do you think that this is a decision that is likely to be made at that level?
Yeah, I think on every level, we're going to have to make those decisions. And again, I keep bringing up Nazi Germany because I think as a country, that's where we are. We're at a reckoning that, regardless of where we sit on the political spectrum, things are going to change, right? Like you said, this pandemic doesn't really care if you're rich or you're poor, although because we have a system of racism here, people who have been, branded as non-white and don't have access to capital have suffered a lot more.
Thank you very much, Darold. As always, I'm absolutely thrilled to have had this conversation. I feel like it was a conversation, for me, and others were just spying in. You've heard it from the man. Shoot him an email, get in touch, get into good trouble, even if it means sometimes going through some tough times. All righty. Thank you, Darold. Everyone is still tuned in. It's as if people don't want to leave, but we are out of time. That means we have to do that next take 2. We have to do that next session, and we'll inform everyone when that is planned.